May you know that by your love for God, that may today be enough for you. We ended a sermon series and we're stepping into a new one, and it was kind of inspired by a lot of different things. And a couple weeks ago, I shared with you my fears in life, and one of them that I had as a kid was I had a very, I don't even want to say irrational fear. I had a huge fear of death and dying. It was tremendous. It was like I couldn't sleep at night. I felt bad for my parents because it was like wake up screaming nightmares, all this stuff. So my aunt, who thought she could help my mom in this situation, and we were down at the family greenhouse and my grandparents' house, and she took it on her to help me get over my fear of death and dying by taking me on walks in the local cemetery. I love my aunt dearly. I don't really understand, but it was every day we'd go for a walk in the cemetery that was across the road, and we'd look at all of the tombstones, and we'd look at them, and she'd be like, oh, look, they have the last name Smith, and this family has the Smith. You think they're related? And tried to have conversations, and I don't know the science behind it. I know it didn't work, but if my aunt's listening, I apologize. Your methods, I appreciate the love, I appreciate the support, but right, like it's one of those things in life. Like we have these fears of death and dying, and we look at this, and the tombstone is meant to be the part, like the lasting legacy. So I Google searched tombstones, and I went down a huge rabbit trail of unique tombstones, and I want to share a few of those with you. To just lighten the mood on our talk about tombstones and death and dying. The first one I came across was this one I like. I told you I was sick. The next one I laughed way too hard at, just because I feel like that. Jesus called and Kim answered, only, putting that in there. This third one did make me laugh, just my humor of I see dumb people. The last one I feel like Jamie's going to put on my tombstone. Go away, I'm asleep. But more than anything, you have to be careful what your last name is, and when you look at a tombstone, and more than anything, this one, I was in the office by myself, and I laughed so hard that the guys next door actually later said, what were you laughing about? Because I don't laugh out loud all that often, but this last one, I have to say, I completely laughed at way too loud. I feel like if your last name's Spanks, you got to know not to say Arthur Spanks' wife, Catherine. Like forever she is just mortalized by that entire, like they've got to be up in heaven right now going, you did what to the tombstone, right? And you just got to be careful. But this entire next sermon series that we're going to talk about is really off the fact of some of the funerals that I've had to do, and in talking to the families about the legacy that is left behind. And I found a story and I found a poem about this, and it was just pretty much talking about that dash, the dash between the time that we're born and the time that God calls us home. And what does living in that dash look like? What is living in that moment? What is living every day of our life in honor and glorifying to God, but giving the most, right? And I want you to understand that doesn't mean we have to wake up every day at 5 a.m. and end every day at 2 a.m. or whatever to make sure we live that moment. But it's really just living a life that is honoring and pleasing to God. So at the end of the day, at the end of our life, when we're standing, however that looks before God, and he can say, well done, good and faithful servant. Well done. You did what you were called to do. You did with your life what was expected, and you did more than anybody could hope. And what does that look like to truly live in the dash? And over the next few weeks, we're going to be talking about that and what it looks like for us as Christians to follow what God has called us to do. In living the most of this life, living in the middle, living in that dash, the part of God that he's called us to be, whether that be as a student in school, whether that be as a college student, whether that be as a young professional, whether that be as somebody that's had the same job for 50 years, whether that be a retiree. How do we live in that dash? How do we live in this moment? Because God has us here still for a reason. And how can we do that? So the Bible verse that I want to dive into this week is going to be in Ephesians 5. So Ephesians if you don't know, was written by Paul. Paul was one of the first apostles, one of the first followers of Christ. He had a big transformation moment. I could get lost in an entire sermon of who Paul is, and I know we've talked about Paul if you've been here before, but Paul was one of those guys that he wrote letters to different churches. And this is in Ephesians, so it's to the church of Ephesus. And he wrote this letter, and he would write encouraging, but also like those backhanded letters, the ones that you get where like maybe end of a marking period from a teacher, like, I love having little Johnny in my class, but he talks too much. I mean, that was never said about me, but other kids, right? Like he had those moments where he would sit there and he would talk about this. So this part of Ephesians 5 is literally talking about the fact that we as Christians need to have a faith like a child. We need to have a faith. We need to be followers of Christ in the way that we need to imitate loving God like we're children. And so it starts off, imitate God, therefore, in everything you do, because you are his dear children. Live a life filled with love. Following the example of Christ, he loved us and offered himself as a sacrifice for us, a pleasing aroma to God, which is, right, like when you look at that, the word aroma always makes me laugh. And there, like, I don't know, maybe I'm a middle school, like I need to smell like God does, so I need to put on the same cologne as him. But really we need to be everything like God. We need to have every part of our life so that people see that the essence of who we are is like Christ. And so it starts off in there with that first part. It's about following God's love. We need to do it in love. We need to follow God's love, and we need to do it in love. And then he continues on through there, and we're not going to read through all the different parts, but he encourages us in the middle of this part of Ephesians 5. He encourages us to imitate God. He calls us to do what pleases God. And he talks there that non-believers are marked by a persistent pattern of these behaviors. So he tells us what to do, and then he says, if you want to know what a non-believer looks like, they're going to consistently not be these things. They're going to consistently not show light. They're going to consistently not show love. They're going to consistently do these other parts. And then he ends it here with 14 through 17, where he says, for the light makes everything visible. This is why it is said, awake, O sleeper. Rise up from the dead, and the Christ will give you light. So be careful how you live. Don't live like fools, but like those who are wise. Make the most of every opportunity in these evil days. Don't act thoughtlessly, but understand what the Lord wants you to do. So this part of Ephesians 5, if nothing else, if you want to mark in your Bible, just that 1 through 21. If you want to know what it's like to live the dash, if you want to know what it's like to passionately follow Christ, and if you're questioning what he has for your life, read Ephesians 5, 1 through 21. It just literally says be a follower. Like, flee from evil things. It talks about the things of this world. Flee from those things and lean into God. And you're going to be seen, because the more often you do that, people will see Christ. The less often you do that, it's going to show you that you're a non-follower. It's going to show that your Christianity isn't enough. So lean into that. And the truth of the matter is, as we talk about living in the dash, there's parts of my life that I'm not living in the dash. Like Jamie and I talk about this often with our own marriage, with raising kids and doing that stuff, right? Like we look at the end of the day and go, did I live the way that I was supposed to live? Did I do the things that I was supposed to do? I had opportunities. Did I do those things? And there's lots of parts that I'm failing in that. But then you start to look at what truly does giving your life to the Lord look like. And so earlier this week, well, it was about a week and a half ago, Jackson and I were riding in the car, and there's always, right, when you're talking to, well, I almost said 11, now 12-year-old kid, when you're talking to that age bracket, there's always like a hidden meaning behind every question, correct? Like parents, they ask a question, you kind of wonder, where are you going with this? So he said, we're driving in the Jeep, and he said, Dad, do you ever wish that we just didn't do what we do? I need a little bit more to that. Well, do you ever wish that we didn't have the church? And I said, no, I really do love our church. And he's like, well, no, do you ever wish that you wouldn't be a pastor? Like after I kept pushing, like he's like, do you wish that you wouldn't be a pastor? And I'm like, okay, buddy, like why? What are you getting at? Because I'm like, does it look like The times, those moments that I'm stressed out, is that what? So this became like probably 15, 20 minutes to get to the heart of it. And finally, as all good 12-year-olds come up with, it was like, no, I know that if you weren't a pastor, you could make a whole lot more money, and I know I could have got more things for my birthday. What? Like I backed up and like, are you, no, buddy, it doesn't work that way. And I said, honestly, even if I was a school teacher, we still would probably be in the same spot. But even if I was like doing all of the other things, or I somehow landed a job making a whole lot more money, and I said, buddy, honestly, Mom and I want to live this way because we truly believe in helping others and helping others with our finances, our time, and our gifts, and we want to do that. And he and I ended up having a great conversation that turned in, I think he felt a little guilty about then questioning his birthday gifts. But like we had this deep talk of this is what we're meant to do. And I actually said, Jackson, it actually works out pretty well because the next sermon series, we're going to be talking about this. And he's not listening this week because he's helping in the back. But, right, like the thing is about living our life and living the dash and understanding, like there are many things, again, I don't want to come up here and say that we're perfect, but there are many things that Jamie and I feel like we've leaned into and done really well in living the dash. And yes, and when I look back at that and the conversation Jamie and I had following that conversation with Jackson was like, yeah, no, it could be. There's many things that we could shut down the church, we could step away from this, and I could find a job, I'm very confident, making more money. I could do these things. We could not help other people. We could step down from some of those other things. And honestly, it would make our family and our finances probably a lot better. But that's not what we want because we are called to be this way. We're called to act this way. We're called to help people. We're called to be there for them. And so I need you to understand, as we talk about accepting Jesus Christ into your heart, and we've talked about that over the last couple of weeks, and as you accept Jesus and you become a Christian, that step is easy, but living for Christ, living the dash is not. Living for God in the dash is not an easy thing to do. And you have to battle it every day. The first part is it's difficult. I'm not going to lie to you and say it's hunky-dory and Jamie and I have this great time where we go on our nightly skips together rather than walk because we're so happy and skipping and it's wonderful, right? It's not, we're walking, we're talking. It's difficult. And we share that almost nightly when we talk about it. It's difficult to truly live in the dash. It's difficult to do the things and to say, God, what is it that you would have us do in this situation? Because when I ask that question to God, it's usually a very difficult response. So living for God in the dash is difficult. The second thing is unnatural. The rest of the world is going to tell you to not do the things that living for God looks like. It's unnatural. And the last thing that I need to tell you is that it's scary. Living for God and truly asking God, what do you have? It's scary. And I'm not up here to say that I've had this figured out because I'm telling you the moments that we've leaned into the most into living the dash and living for God are some of the scariest moments of my life. And I've shared that before. I'm so excited. And during that last worship song, I just went outside because I wanted to sing that last song really, really loud. And I didn't want any of you to be distracted by the ugly voice that was in the back. So I went outside and sang it really, really loud. And I just sat up and looked at the sky. And I sat there and I said, thank you, God. As this church is getting to be in 2 months, 3 years old, we're close to our 3-year church anniversary, whatever. I'm making up words, right? As we're almost to that point, and I'm just blown away by the things that God's done. But I can tell you, and you've all heard part of this story, but when I stepped down from the last position, and I looked at my wife, and I came home, and I said, this is our last paycheck until who knows? It was one of the scariest things that Jamie and I have ever done. Into going into that season and going, okay, God, I don't know what you have, but I know you've called us to do this. And you've called us to step on this. And it was scary. But you need to understand, it's difficult. It's scary. It's unnatural. But when you do it, it is so rewarding. The things that God provides, the times, those God moments where it can't be anything but God. When you get a check in the mail from a lady that you have no idea. I found the card this week alone. I don't even know where it came from. It must have been in a stack of whatever. And from a lady that I have no idea. If she was sitting right here, I have no idea who she is. And a card in the mail that just beautifully written and says, John, I love what you and Jamie are doing, and I want to give $5,000 to your church. That came a week after Jamie and I stepped down and went, oh, we're so scared. I have no idea who she is. I don't know if that was like a penny to her. I don't know what that looked like. But she leaned into that, and God used it to bless Jamie and I and say, oh, I guess this is real. Those moments, it's so rewarding when you can truly live in the dash. And when we live in the dash, when we seek God and when we say, God, what is it that you have for me? This beautiful thing happens. You become teachable. So you teachers out there, I know we got a handful of them. There's nothing better as a teacher, right, than having a kid that just wants to learn. Or maybe you're a coach. There's nothing better. I love when I coach and there's a kid that's like, hey, coach, da-da-da-da-da, and tells me what they can do to be better. As a parent, when your kids come to you and say, how can I be better? There's nothing better in that world, right, as that. So I got to believe it's the same way with God. When we live in the dash and we become teachable and we say, God, what is it that you would have for me? What does today look like? What does leaning into this relationship with you even more look like? Because we're not meant to stand still. We're meant for more. We're meant to reach out to him. Psalm 90:12 says, teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom. Teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom. We as Christians need to constantly be working on ourselves. And I encourage you over the next however many weeks of this series, as I believe it's 6 more weeks of this, that we're going to talk about living the dash. And we're going to talk about things that come up when life throws you a curveball and it's falling apart. We're going to talk about when the life that you planned ends up nothing like the life you currently have. I feel like Jamie and I could write like a 30-page paper on that right now about the life that you planned. I've shared that before. Jamie and I feel bad for her because I tricked her. When we went on our whatever date at Christmas, 2008, is that right? We went on a date and I took her on a carriage ride and we sat there in the carriage and we were talked about our dreams and our future, and I told her what we were going to be and what we were going to look like and what our life was going to look like. I lied. It's been nothing like that, and somehow she still took the ring and I tricked her, right? But we walked through those seasons, and we're going to talk about living in that dash when you had plans for it and God went, no, that's not how it's going to go. We're going to talk about how to truly dive into the Word more. We're going to talk about what it means to truly understand that we have nothing. Because the truth of the matter is we don't have anything. God has provided everything for us. As a church, he's provided this building for us. He's provided a seat to sit on. He's provided all this stuff. And it's the same way for you. And I can tell you story after story after story of friends of mine that have thought life was going really well, and they lost a job, that they no longer can maintain the style that they once had. That you can just story after story of that, and we're going to share those. So I encourage you over the next 6 weeks to lean into that. I encourage you over the next 6 weeks. Trey talked about this next week, and we are now registered. I didn't even know this was a thing. It's National Back to Church Sunday next week. And you can register online, and our church is registered as a place for people to come if they've never stepped foot in a church or they're at their heart's working on coming back into a church. But to me, it's also a perfect Sunday to invite somebody that you may be on the fence about inviting to come back to church or to come to church with you. And again, I've said this before, I don't care what church people go to, whether it's one church or any other church. I'll help you find a church that you love, but invite somebody to come, because it's kind of like, I don't know, my family, Jamie, celebrates national everything. Like, it's National Coffee Sunday, it's National Punch Your Husband in the Shoulder Sunday. That was a thing. No, okay, maybe not. But right, like, there's national all these things, and it's National Go Back to Church Sunday. It's the Sunday somebody set aside. And we've tried so hard as church and as an organization to push people back into these doors by all these rules and regulations and whatever. But the truth of the matter is, we need to be living in the dash, living in our own life, living what God has called us. And part of that is just letting people know that we're a Christian, and we have something that we want to share with them. I stumbled across this, if you listen to K-Love ever, I was going through and I stumbled across this. Did you know in 1896, the church tried to make a law to outlaw riding your bikes on Sunday mornings? They tried to outlaw riding your bikes on Sunday morning because people going on bike rides was taking away from the people going to church. People were finding relaxation, were finding ways. And so they tried to outlaw riding your bikes on Sunday morning. We can't set up more laws. We can't set up more rules. We have to be a people that realize the importance of walking through this. We have to set the priority for walking through this door and growing our faith and being in our word, studying our Bibles, doing those things that we know. We have to be those people. And that's what God's called us to be. Let's stop looking for reasons why or excuses or whatever. Instead, live in the dash. So one of the things that I used to do often, and in times that my life seems to be going better, I do. But I remember those days when after I left the last church, and I didn't know what we were going to do, and I August 6th, I woke up and I said, God, what is it that you would have for me today? Because I have nothing to do. I don't have a job to go to. Adam's not at the hardware, so I can't tease him. Whatever, I can't find reasons to do all this other thing. I didn't know what I was going to do. And I literally laid in bed and I just went, God, what is it that you would have for me today? And I just felt God say, get up and show people me. I don't need you to do all these fancy things. I don't need you to whatever. I need you to just get up and whatever comes your way, show people me. And I got up that day and I did a bunch of stuff, and I worked on helping my wife. I worked on doing things for the kids. I went into town. I talked to people. I just tried to do that. And the seasons of my life, and especially during that season, it was so rewarding those few months before the church actually officially launched, because every morning I woke up with that. And so if for nothing else today, I want you this to be our take-home point as we kick off this series. I want you to look at every morning and say, how can I live for you today, God? And that's my encouragement for you this week. And it may stick, it may not. But what would it look like to every morning this week, for everybody in this room, everybody listening, to wake up and say, God, how can I live for you today? What does living for you today look like? And setting our tone before our feet even hit the floor to say, God, I want to live for you. So what does it look like? And if there's somebody I need to talk to, help me talk to them. If there's somebody I need to apologize to, help me give the strength to apologize to them. If there's somebody I need to help. And when we truly lean into that, it's so rewarding because God is seen by those little things that we do. So how can we live for God today? Pray with me, won't you? Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for today. As we kick off this series about living the dash of our life, living the life that you called us to be, living in that season of whatever you have for us. God, may we lean closer to you in this season. And God, just show us. As we wake up every morning saying, what do you have for me? What is it that you would have for me, God? And just show us those opportunities. May we see the beauty of truly following you. In those seasons that are difficult, those parts that are unnatural, the things that are scary, may we just embrace it so much, God, that you will be seen, because that's what we want. We give our life in honor to you, God, so that others may see you and have this wonderful gift of salvation in Christianity. Thank you so much for that. And God, tender our heart to those that need you the most. It's in your name. Amen.